Hello and welcome to another episode of Spiritually Incorrect. On this episode, we have Your Progressive Elites, the return of the Norse gods, and the very end of democracy. I'm your host, Seth Hart. Join with me is Jonathan Lionheart.
Howdy!
John, who do we have today?
We have Dr. R.R. Reno, who you might have seen from, he's the founder and editor of First Things. He was formerly a professor of theology and ethics at Creighton University, and now he runs the very, very, very popular online magazine First Things, which I'm sure if you're reading stuff online, you've seen a lot of articles from them. They're a pretty big deal. And his education was at Yale University and Haverford College. So,
Yeah.
And he famously penned an article in 2016 defending, from a Christian standpoint, voting for Donald Trump. And so we're having him as a counterpoint to the previous episode with Jim Wallis, former spiritual advisor to the Obama White House. Jim kind of said, no, you can't vote for a Trump and be a Christian. And Crump. And Dr. Reno's here to say, well, actually, you can and you should as a Christian.
Yep,
And so
part two, and the election.
And it's in the dialectic between these figures.
John insisted that we put this out right before the election so that it would be freshest on your mind, so that you would know who to vote for. John did.
No, you're baiting me. I wanted to release it weeks ago. At the same time, you didn't have time to edit it by then. So, no.
We had the Halloween episode. You are the one who even wanted to do a two-part Trump episode.
Seth is trying to make it look like I'm something, to force me to say that I'm not, and then to play my cards, and then this whole thing backfires.
People don't know what we're talking about.
No, they don't. You should cut all of this.
John. Yes, I am trolling you. We've been trying to get this out for, a while. We obviously had to release these in different parts just due to the nature of how these interviews worked out. So you're getting this just in time for the election. And just in case you're curious, if you listen to part one, you got to hear me defend Trump and John defend the anti-Trump position. Well, we switched sides this time.
Yep, and I very heartily defended President Donald Trump. I took it very seriously, and I'm very proud of what I produced.
Yeah, that was just a token of political defense there. I don't think the Lincoln Douglas debates themselves had such a amazing back and forth. And that's it. Are we done?
No, I'm trying to think of something funny to say, and I just can't. I've kind of worked myself into a corner here.
Oh, I'm probably gonna do better.
Yeah, no. So,
so be sure to, if you haven't already, check out that first part. And hey, if you haven't gone out and to vote, make sure to go out and vote. Early voting's obviously already started, and this is probably going to be releasing either on election day or right before it. So please go out and vote.
And make Canada great again.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Well, I'm the editor of First Things magazine, which is a magazine that tries to cover religious topics, cultural topics, and then address the political moment in which we live. Before that, I was a professor of theology at Creighton University for 20 years, from 1990 to 2010. And I have a PhD in theology. So I think of myself as kind of operating at the intersection of scholarly work and public commentary. And it's that overused word, public intellectual.
Great. Well, in your book, Return of the Strong Gods, you argue that post-war society has attempted to sort of upend the foundations of faith, family, and nation. Can you speak a bit about that? And what are these strong gods that are returning?
The way the book works is that I'm trying to suggest, I'm not a historian, and the book is really a kind of exercise in journalistic history rather than scholarly history. But I want to suggest a thesis about how we should think about the 20th century. And I divide the 20th century into two halves. The first half is the time of catastrophe, 1914 to 1945. I think most Americans don't have a full sense of how catastrophic those years were. World War I is not part of America's public memory, but in the European context, there are countless books written in the 1920s about how the slaughter in the trenches on the Western Front really fundamentally undermined confidence in the social order. Many people kind of despaired of the possibility of progress and democracy and so on. And then, of course, the Great Depression, and then the rise of both communism and fascism, two totalitarian ideologies, Spanish Civil War, which was seen as a preview of a global conflict between these two modern ideologies, fascism and communism, which of course did come to pass when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, and then World War II, that probably the most emblematic aspects of that trauma are Auschwitz, the Holocaust, and Nagasaki and Hiroshima. In both cases, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a nuclear weapon killing 100,000 people in one blast. So we tend to think of World War II as a good war, but John Rawls, who was a famous political philosopher, very influential in the second half of the 20th century, was a young army officer in Japan in 1946 and went to Hiroshima, and he described that as a experience that really caused him to lose his religious faith. So that feeling of just a gut punch that knocked the wind out of the West, or I say that 1914 to 1945 knocked the stuffing out of the West, and it set up a reaction. It set up a civilizational effort to prevent that disaster from ever happening again. It's what I call the never again imperative. And this led to, what I think of as the open society idea. So the most influential diagnosticians of this catastrophe said that it was a kind of authoritarianism, a closed-mindedness, a judgmentalism, a quick consolidation around what were thought to be deep truths, blood and soil, dictatorship and proletariat, what have you. And the solution was to weaken people's loves and loyalties. And I guess the way I always put it is just a simple idea. If nothing is worth fighting for, weakening of things, then by definition, nobody will fight. And you could see how that's very tempting as a solution to the catastrophes of the first half of the 20th century. Kind of a moral relativism, not really relativism, because it's not like people don't think there's any moral truths, but they're minimal, they're hedged with phrases like, from my point of view. And so that brings us to the early decades of the 21st century, where we have kind of paradoxically obligatory non-judgmentalism. And it leads to an environment of where everything is liquid, nothing is solid, people don't have a sense of belonging, they don't have a secure and stable home. That's a metaphor that I use a lot in the book. And we're just not made to live that way. Human beings are made to. St. John Paul II observed that we're kind of hardwired to give ourselves away in love. So we want our lives to be ordered towards higher and more noble ideals, goods, realities. We've been deprived of them by the open society consensus, and hence the disruption and turmoil of our present political and cultural situation. And I speculate that populism is a desire to restore certainly nation, but also we see both presidential candidates in this current moment. They're both they're both competing with each other about who can give the most money to women who've just had children with the tax credits, $5,000, $6,000. It goes to the highest bidder, and that suggests maybe family is returning as a value. So family and flag, and then the third identifies is faith. Um, and I think there is a kind of stirring of interest in religion in the present moment. Elon Musk calling himself a cultural Christian, even Richard Dawkins, the notorious atheist, calling himself a cultural Christian, Jordan Peterson flirting with Christianity, um, um, uh, Hersey Ali converting to Christianity, former libertarian. So there's something stirring out there, and I use this metaphor, Return of the Strong Gods, to describe this broad spectrum turn towards strong loves and loyalties across a wide spectrum of values and aspects of political and cultural life.
And so, why do you use the term strong gods?
It's a metaphor for the things that beckon us to set aside our self-interest and devote ourselves to something greater. So it's a metaphor. I'm not saying that the Norse gods of Valhalla are returning, but rather that uh, that the kind of floating, non-judgmental, nothing is worth fighting for, everything deconstructed, that this sentiment has run its course, and that people are increasingly attracted to these loves and loyalties that I call strong gods.
Well, first of all, I would love for your next book to be about the Norse gods returning. That sounds fantastic.
Well, I don't know. They're pretty bloodthirsty. I'm not sure we want them.
Well, and obviously, I mean, this ties into our question today of Trump, because so many people see Trump as helping bring back faith, family, and the nation. And so I guess we can just sort of dive into it. You penned an article about why you are anti-Trump. Can you explain what you mean by that and that terminology, anti-Trump?
I I got very frustrated in 2016, and it's ongoing. Um, this misdiagnosis of the Trump phenomenon as, you know, white old white men who are fearful of change. Where if you look at the demographic supporting Trump, that's not the case at all. People have wised up to that, but they're still in this kind of it's racism rearing its ugly head. It's fascism. I mean, good grief. I mean, how many articles have been written about Trump as the return of Hitler? It's a sign of subtlety when someone can analogize Trump to Francesco Franco, the Spanish dictator, in the middle of the 20th century. It's a little more subtle analogy. So I'm anti because I think that that kind of diagnosis blinds our elite to an accurate assessment of the problems facing our country. We are not facing problems of paramilitary organizations marching in the street. The problems facing our country are problems of disintegration of the family, uh, a porous border, um, disintegration of viable communities, disintegration of the economic foundations for middle class prosperity. These are all the problems facing our country. 100,000 people dying a year of drug overdose death, and and you would think so there are people throughout our country who know someone who's lost a son, mostly sons, to this scourge of fentanyl. Um, and are we surprised that they want to vote for a man who says that I'm going to I'm opposed to the people who brought you this society and culture? So I think it's important for being anti-Trump is to be opposed to that kind of willful self-blinding to the realities of the country.
So when you say you're anti-Trump, you're not very blindly just saying you're for Trump. What you're doing is you're very nuanced, saying the opposition to Trump is just wrong-headed. It doesn't understand why the Trump phenomenon exists. Is that
It's
right?
gotten better. I think I penned that article back in, in 2016, where I think both the Republican establishment and Democratic establishment just refused to acknowledge that the people voting for Trump were doing so for good reasons. The big, beautiful wall. I mean, that's a metaphor for a politician, a very powerful kind of condensed symbol, the wall, for a politician who's basically promising, I will protect you. And then, so you got to ask yourself, well, why would somebody resonate with a message, I will protect you? Well, hello, folks. Globalization has exposed high school educated Americans to wage competition throughout the entire world. And mass immigration subjects them to wage competition. Maybe they would like to be a little bit protected. Or how many people grow up now in broken homes? And so even in the what used to be the family could offer protection increasingly is a source of anguish, not security for people. And then no father in heaven, no father at home, the secularization of Gen Zers. I mean, there's just lots of angles of analysis that we could take. Some are economic, some are cultural and spiritual. But there are lots of angles we can take. And it just seems to me that no matter which angle you take, the society in which we live offers way less security to a 25-year-old than it did to me 40 years ago when I was 25 years old. When I was 25 years old, I mean, life is always throws you curveballs. There's no such thing as perfect security. But it never occurred to me to think, oh, am I going to get married? Or am I going to have children? Who to get married to? Very difficult question. But it just strikes me as mind-boggling to be able to grow up in an environment where you have to decide, am I going to get married? Am I going to have children? Or even, am I a man or a woman? I mean, it just, I have a great deal of sympathy for young people. And so it's just not surprising to me that people would turn to someone who offers themes, metaphors, symbols of, and also policies, obviously actual protectionist policies. Doesn't surprise me. I mean, we can argue about whether tariffs, protectionism, is counterproductive or not. That's a good argument to have. But that fall into a kind of hysterical, the hysterical view that Trump is an authoritarian, that he's about to overturn our constitutional system. It seems to me, this is the anti-Trump hysteria that strikes me as it's a kind of willful refusal to accept the responsibilities of being a citizen and actually thinking long and hard about the problems facing the country and what is a kind of sane, sensible way forward. Now, I want to say, though, things have gotten better. It's now 2024. It's 8 years later. The Democratic Party has changed a great deal. The Republican Party also. Like I said, you've got the two candidates competing with each other about how much money, who can give away the most money to women who have children. That was not happening under Mitt Romney. That was not a Mitt Romney. That was not on the table in 2012. You've got both parties committed to reindustrialization. The Biden administration has spent a couple $1 trillion on reindustrializations under the guise of the green transition. Now, again, you can argue doing it through the green transition, this has led to all kinds of distortions. It should be done more intelligently. I'm an Oren Cass kind of guy with a more focused and a more explicit industrial policy. But the fact that we're now in the arena to have those arguments shows that Trump's emergence in 2016 has had a positive effect on our political culture, not a negative effect. I don't want to dispute his intemperate language. I wish he was more temperate in his political rhetoric. But on the other hand, perhaps that was necessary in order to jar a very, very complacent system out of its very deep ruts. So I think historians will look back at what we don't know what happens if he is elected. So it's still an open question. But I think it may be the case that historians will look back and see Trump as a very important phenomenon that got the United States back on track, and the next generation will wind up moving in directions that are being laid out here in this tumultuous time.
Can you speak a little bit more about that first presidency and some of the goods that you saw generated just from Trump?
Probably, I see probably three areas. I think economic policy, cultural policy, foreign policy. Immigration is it's really a cultural policy, not a economic policy. It has economic consequences, to be sure, but it really revolves around what kind of a country we want to have and what it means to be a unified people. And I think immigration, I'm not anti-immigration, that's absurd, but one has to be realistic about the rate of migration into the country to be able to sustain social cohesion and social solidarity. And I think we've exceeded. That rate is much too high right now, especially under this sort of hazy asylum, technically not illegal, but kind of unrestrained. And so I think he obviously did a good. At the end of his administration, asylum seekers had to apply for asylum on the other side of the border. That had a dramatic effect on lowering the rate of crossing. That was a good achievement. I think sending the warning signals about China. Our elite had already acknowledged that we had to pivot to China. Obama said that many, many times, but it didn't really happen because so much economic. There's a lot at stake economically. People have a lot of money to lose from too rapid of a disengagement from China, but the tariffs that Trump imposed really forced the beginning of a process of disengagement with China. Both parties are now behind it. I think that's an important achievement. And then in foreign policy, we didn't go to war in his watch. I don't blame the Biden administration, but in the vagaries of history, why did Putin invade Ukraine under why was Crimea under Obama's administration and Ukraine under Biden's administration, but no actions were taken under the Trump administration? Maybe it's just happenstance, or maybe Trump has the right combination. His instincts are correct. Opposite of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Talk softly and carry a big stick," and Trump seems to be talk loudly and carry a small stick. And maybe that's the right secret sauce, if you will, for our very difficult foreign policy position in the 2020s. But I think those are legitimate achievements. There are many things: chaotic administration, many missed opportunities. 2017 tax bill was kind of retro Reaganism. I'm not sure that I would put that down as a great achievement.
Well, if those are the achievements that you see in his previous presidency, what are you hoping he's going to accomplish if he is elected again? What is it that you see as electing him will achieve?
I think it just in all three areas, it's kind of similar. It's crystal clear that his administration will get a handle on immigration. I think, I'm more than happy to deport the Venezuelan criminal gangs in Aurora, Colorado. That would be delightful to me. So I think a firm hand is very important for deterrence of the wrong sorts of people that try to come into our country. I think foreign policy I think Trump has a good, and I think the Vance Trump are aligned in recognizing that we do not have limitless resources um, as a country to police the whole world. And so we have to make hard choices and be focused in what we want to achieve in terms of our foreign policy. I think the reindustrialization, disengagement with China, that will continue. Um, and also in matters of a social conservative, and although he has, betrayed the pro-life cause, there's no question that his administration, won't be prosecuting protesters in front of abortion clinics as has been done by the Biden administration with this poor fellow up in Philadelphia, and it won't be putting pressure on religious and social conservatives to conform to what I call Rainbow Reich, Rainbow Agenda. So I think that would be a positive opportunity to sort of take, people say, oh, people on the right, they prosecute a culture war. But that's not been my experience over my lifetime. All of the aggression comes from the progressive left and all these cultural domains as they constantly press for the next stage of liberation. So they've, it looks like this election, it may be that Democratic Party's vulnerability is in transgender ideology, which it can't seem to distance itself from the activists in their own party.
Well, you've given a good case for why Christians ought to vote for Trump, but I do know a lot of Christians who are a bit reserved about Trump for a lot of his rhetoric that you've mentioned. And so they tend to believe that while there's some short-term gains by having a Trump presidency, will it have a long-term negative impact on his association with the church? Because a lot of people do associate the two. Now, my question to you is, how would you respond to some of those fears?
Yeah, I don't see, why would you assume that because people think he's the best choice given the options, that somehow that associates the church with his administration? The people, yeah, I just don't take that seriously. This is just an attempt to intimidate Christians into thinking that somehow, if you vote for Donald Trump, you're besmirching the gospel. When in fact, what you're doing is you're making an all things considered political judgment about what you think is best for the country, best for your fellow citizens. Is he, a choir boy? By no means. Is he, is there a kind of cynical transactional character to what he's up to? Undoubtedly. Part of what Trump is so, one reason that our elite really hates him is he says out loud and without shame the things that they do regularly in a hidden way, and that they don't want to have to air in public. Like, here's a good example. So in my lifetime, one of the big changes has been how much wealth is now in Washington, D.C. And, the kind of power couple, phenomenon, you serve in the Department of Treasury, your wife's a big time lawyer for one of the big firms in Washington. And, people know that you give business to your wife and there's all kinds of ways in which now Washington is set up as a giant log rolling operation. And, and then, so right. I'm babbling a little bit here, but I'm just
No,
disputing the idea that somehow my vote for Trump compromises uh, the witness of the gospel.
Uh,
I'm not voting for Trump to be the pastor of my church. I'm voting for Trump to be president of the United States. Am I aware of his limitations? Of course. Am I aware of Kamala Harris's limitations? I think so. I'm making an overall judgment, and I don't think voting for writing in somebody or I think listeners should beware the lure of moral purity. I'm not going to soil myself with the clearly the Harris campaign, forget about not being pro-life. It's a kind of abortion as a sacrament. It's very difficult for me to imagine voting for that party under the current conditions. Uh, whereas the Trump is a mixed bag, and so I can reconcile myself to that. But some obscure third party, again, I don't want to question people's consciences, but beware the desire to be, be pure. Politics is a messy business. We have a duty as citizens to vote, and our voting, we should think about, am I actually voting, or am I pretending to vote where I opt out of the system as it's currently configured? And okay, maybe opting out is the right thing, but don't kid yourself. You're washing your hands.
So when you're
washing your hands of our political moment. Non-participation is an option. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I interrupted you. You can continue.
No, that's it.
I was going to say, are you so much, when it comes to this question of Christianity's association with Trump, are you saying that people aren't leaving the faith because of that, or that they shouldn't? Because I can think of, just off the top of my head, at least 7 or 8 of my friends who've kind of been like, I grew up in the church, or, I was very excited about this, and then Christian culture started to go in this Trumpist direction, and I just couldn't follow in that direction. And I can think of multiple people who've kind of doubted their faith or even left the faith in light of the last 8 years, because they've been kind of very uncomfortable with where the church has been heading, especially evangelical Christianity. Does that make sense?
Evangelicals, I'm Catholic. I have not been to a church service in 8 years that mention politics from the pulpit. There are core issues, pro-life issues, protecting life from conception to natural death. That's a regular phrase that I hear in church, but I don't hear about candidates. I've never heard of it. Evangelicals are different. It's a Protestant country at root, and evangelicals and it used to be mainline Protestants and evangelicals were fighting with each other for the soul of our Protestant nation. That's kind of the way people thought about it in the first half of the 20th century. But the mainline Protestants became secular, and now they are progressive Democrats who live in wealthy suburbs around Boston. But they also believe it's their country, and they own this country. Somebody like Barack Obama, the arrogance, the hauteur, the thin skin, the preachy tones that he uses. He's like a mainline Protestant of my childhood. Just frustrated that these rubes are not getting in line and accepting the leadership of Protestant people who are the good, righteous, descendants of Puritans who know best. And then you've got the rustics in the backwoods who are in rebellion against the great and the good. And, that's a kind of evangelical culture that has its origins in the Second Great Awakening, the Stone Campbell movement. It's very populist. It's very anti-elite. So it's resurfaced. This conflict has resurfaced in our society. A conflict that dates back, like I said, more than 200 years. I strongly recommend listeners to read Nathan Hatch's marvelous book, The Democratization of American Christianity, which is about the political valences in the Second Great Awakening, which is the origins of basically what we think of as American evangelicalism as its origins. It's the populist, low church, Bible-only Christianity as its origins in the Second Great Awakening. And there are strong populist political dimensions. And you just change out the name of some obscure person we never heard of running a religious magazine in New Hampshire, like super angry, anti-Calvinistic clerical elite. Just substitute Tucker Carlson's name for that guy and put, the liberal elite for the clerical elite, and you basically have the same rhetoric. It's kind of amazing. So I think that people just need to sort of realize that the historical roots of this and the legitimacy of the conflict. I mean, it's not, our elite is very detached from the country that it runs. And so, to your point about friends who've left, I mean, there are people who grew up in an evangelical environment and they get advanced degrees. They are likely to be increasingly enculturated into the successor institution of mainline churches, which are the universities. So they've become mainline Protestants in a moral cultural sense. And so, of course, they feel a tremendous tension between the church of their childhood and their current moral, political, spiritual convictions. And I think it does very little to do with Trump. It does in the sense that he's the trigger. He's the one that kind of crystallizes this conflict and makes it, raises the heat and makes it for many people unbearable. Do you think, Jonathan, was that coherent as an explanation?
Yeah, I think it makes sense where you're going with that. So,
but I'm not.
And we both have taught at Stone Campbell institutions, so I thought I'd bring that out. So,
which one?
Lincoln Seminary.
Right. I mean, so I think the evangelical world is in it's in a very difficult situation because the evangelical elite are increasingly socialized into the American elite, and the American elite is progressive, and so you can be a kind of faithful Nicene, you can affirm the Nicene Creed and so on, but you begin to, anti-racism becomes real important to you. A culture of inclusion becomes important to you. You become anxious about the way in which traditional Christianity is taught LGBTQ folks. So you basically take on the preoccupation and concerns of what I would call the open society consensus. And 20 years ago, that wasn't a problem because the rank and file and evangelicals were not mobilized. But they've increasingly become mobilized, and they see that consensus as hostile to their way of life. And they're correct in recognizing that hostility. It is true. It is hostile. If you look at one of the real helpful things for me was this study that the University of Virginia Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture at James Davison Hunter's operation at UVA did a report on the culture of the cultures, plural, of American families, plural. And one of the family types is a progressive family. And they value diversity and inclusion. But there is one category that they do not want their children to become friends with. And guess what that category is? Evangelical Christians. So that's the only category that they do not want their children to be influenced by and friends with. So that's a hostility. And those progressive families represent, and the family values track very, very closely with what I would call a center-left mentality. And then the other family type they identify is called the faithful. And this is basically kind of conservative, not just Protestant, it includes some Catholic, but it's an archetype of the conservative evangelical family. And like you can just see, they are in conflict with each other over how to raise their children. They're in conflict over how schools. They're in conflict over marriage. They're in conflict across a whole range of moral values. And in the progressive family, these people are richer and more powerful. They live in Berkeley and Cambridge and Boulder, Colorado. They think they own the country, and they're very angry that people like me are dragging our feet and not getting with the program. And they'll think nothing of freezing people like me out of employment and what have you. So it's a very progressive group of people, the progressive elite.
And one of the ways that these progressives have tried to, in a sense, they believe warn America is saying that Trump is the end of democracy. That with Trump, he's an absolute threat to democracy and our way of life. What do you think about that threat?
Like I said, that goes back to my anti-Trump. I mean, only a deluded person could believe that Trump, I mean, like, with what tools would he bring an end to democracy? You know, like, hello? Uh, and then also, okay, so which party is proposing to add justices to the Supreme Court? Which party is proposing to make new states? Which party is ended the filibuster? Um, you know, which party is calling into question the legitimacy of the Electoral College? I mean, not the Republican Party, not the party that Trump now controls. So I just find it, I mean, I've got friends who are, they're hysterical about Trump will bring the end of democracy. I mean, you know, he lock her up, Hillary. Did he do it? No. Did he prosecute her? No. But which party is prosecuting the former president of the United States? Again, it's not Trump. It's not his party. Uh, Lawfare, which is a threat to democracy, is it runs in the opposite direction.
So what would you
So I
say
just think
about
it's in a democracy thing. It's a scare tactic. I was in Western Pennsylvania to give a lecture at Grove City College, and I had to drive from Pittsburgh Airport up to Grove City, and I listened to the radio, and the ads for the Democratic Party are solely anti-Trump. They don't say anything about Harris, and he's going to take away women's right to abortion. He's going to end democracy. He's going to violate our Constitution. So this is the scare tactics that um, the campaign is using. Okay, fine. Politics is hardball. It's not. It's a messy business. I don't blame the consultants for coming up with that ad. Maybe it works, but if you have a university degree, you ought to be smart enough to know that you are being propagandized by this kind of rhetoric. And you ought to be able to get some distance from it and recognize that there's lots of reasons to vote against Donald Trump. There are legitimate reasons to vote against Donald Trump, but that ain't one of them.
what would you say? I mean, I can see a lot of listeners on the show going, but what about January 6th? What about him claiming that he won the election when consistently Republican judges are saying there's nothing to that? I mean, isn't there some legitimacy in the fears in that case, or
He's a
where would you
sore
go with that?
loser. He's a sore loser, no doubt about it. I would have observed that 2020 marked the biggest change of uh, electoral law in my lifetime. So, like, he changed the rules dramatically like that, and it does undermine the legitimacy of the election. Um, but I thought he was irresponsible for him to litigate this thing endlessly as he did, and he did encourage people uh, uh, in a direction of lawlessness. That's unfortunate. I don't regard the mob in the Capitol as an insurrection. Uh, they it's hard to envision what it could mean. Like, what they didn't have a plan. Yeah, there was no. I found it disheartening, but not. I wasn't traumatized by it. It was interesting. I wrote about it. My friends in Washington were more traumatized by it. My conservative friends, they were more traumatized by it. From a distance, I thought it was unfortunate, but not this traumatic event.
You've made a. Oh, sorry, Seth. Go ahead. Should I?
I can go on. I was going to go on to 9.
Oh, well, you've made a really good case that Trump is the best sort of, for the strong gods for bringing about these three things: faith, family, and nation. And I wonder if there's any place for Christians kind of debate if those strong gods are in fact good things in and of themselves. I mean, obviously, as a Christian, I'll grant faith, but I wonder about this question of family and nation as priorities, because Christians often describe water as thicker than blood. And when it comes to the family, Jesus says, "Who is my brother and sister? Whoever does the will of God." When the man wants to follow him, but has to bury his father, he says, "Let the dead bury their own dead." And then he says, "I've not come to bring peace, but I've come to set a man against his father." And so, is the idolization of the family inherently a good thing? And I think a similar question could be asked about nation, because we're not supposed to be a nation; we're supposed to be exiles who aren't politically at home. Is there a Christian critique of these categories? And how might you respond to a type of critique of that sort?
You can always make an idol of the family and the nation, to be sure. One has to be very cautious about that. But is that the age we're living in? Uh, I'm sorry, but the family is in tatters. We do not live in an age that's making an idol of marriage and family. Um, so one has to respond to the realities of the time in which one lives. When Jesus says we have to hate our mother and father, brother and sister, he's making a statement about the priority of our um, faith in God over all other earthly loyalties. He was not saying that. He was not saying that the natural family is somehow being superseded by something else. Certainly, Christianity is supported. I mean, the whole notion, Christian sacrament of marriage is ordered towards um, giving the family a supernatural orientation. And the nation is, I think, basically, I see this in progressive Christians. They see the nation as a church. So they're the integralists. That of course the church knows no difference uh, between citizen and non-citizen. Uh, of course the church is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female. But the nation is not a church. And as a political leader, you have a duty to preserve the body politic, which is not something you don't become a U.S. citizen by the rite of baptism. It's a process of so-called naturalization. It's basically civic adoption into a existing body, and so I think in those two domains, um, there are two things. One, of course, idolatry is a problem, but the question is, do we live in an iconoclastic age or an idolatrous age? I mean, yes, we have idols, but I would say our idols are health, wealth, and pleasure, not not the nuclear family, and not the American flag. Um, some circles, American flag can become an idol. Some circles. I'm not a big fan of having flags in church, U.S. National flags in church, because of the supernatural community has to always be very clear that that it is that it's God's vehicle for the consummation of history is the church and not the United States of America. So, I mean, I'm a very patriotic guy, but God does not use the United States of America to bring humanity to fulfillment. Sadly, Samantha Power seems to think otherwise. And, many progressive Americans have this view that somehow, I mean, the arc of history bends towards justice. And of course, the United States military is going to make sure we follow that. I think that's a kind of eschatology that makes an idol of the nation, and not um, a kind of straightforward patriotism that recognizes that we're not citizens of the world, but we're citizens of a particular nation.
We're bucking up on our time limit, so I just want to close out real quick and ask you, what are some resources you direct our listeners to for more from you and for more on this topic, as they're probably deciding who to vote for?
Oh gosh, we do publish stuff every day on firstthings.com. we do. I tell my staff, you know, uh, let's keep our distance from the electoral cycle. The internet is just flooded with commentary on all the minutia of the campaigns.
Well, John, are you going to vote for Trump now?
Well, I'm going to have to at least pretend to for this segment because last episode, I attacked Trump and you defended Trump. We each took those roles. And then we agreed that for this episode, we would swap and I would defend Trump and you would attack Trump. So, for the purposes of the next 20 minutes at least, I will be assuming the position of a Trump supporter who's going to be voting for Trump. So, here we go.
Just assuming.
If you've wanted a Canadian case for Trump, here it is.
Okay.
Assume the position. I shall.
Okay. Did I start off last time or did you? I think I did. So you need to start off.
No, I started off last time. That's fake news, Seth. Fake news. I started off so hard. Okay. It was the biggest start. People said it was the greatest start in the history of debates, Seth.
Okay. So let's stick to kind of the things that Dr. Reno brought up. One of the things is the strong gods. Okay, yes, there is a return of the strong gods, but I think those are appropriately labeled because he admitted in this interview that there are places where the flag is reasserting itself. And while there is a dissolution of family, a dissolution of nation, and that sort of stuff, these are not things that we as Christians should be concerned about. Our concern is the kingdom of God. And that is a global kingdom. So the more globalist the world becomes, the greater the opportunity it is for us as a Christian nation. So I'm not super concerned about these strong gods because they are false gods. They are false gods. They're aptly named because we should not want the return of this. I really don't think we should. We should want the return, we should want the success of the church. And that requires people abandon their families, not, putting Christ over family. And the problem is like with this return, there's nearly an idolatrous, we're seeing this, the idolatrous relationship. There is a reason flags are in churches. It's not because the nation is going away. It's because it's reasserting itself in a way so strong, like nothing we've ever seen before in this nation, I think. And so as Christians, like wanting this value, this number one thing for wanting Trump, which is the return of the strong gods, just doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think that it's not a case of whether those things are absolute. Obviously, family and nation are not absolutes. And if they are pretended to be, then of course it's idolatry. But they can be secondary goods that are below God and shouldn't usurp God's role, but are still good in and of themselves. Ancient Israel was a nation. God worked through the people of God and the kingdom of Israel. God worked through the kingly role of David and Solomon. And Jesus Christ, well, he nuanced that a bit, was still the son of David, the son of this political regal lineage. And so God works for the nation. The nation isn't absolute. It's secondary, of course, to God, as is family. But that doesn't mean those things aren't inherently good, and Christians shouldn't attempt to uphold them as secondary goods that still have a lot of importance. Well, but you know what else is secondary? Your children. That's why God says that Abraham should sacrifice his child out of faith to God. And so your relationship to your child is secondary to your relationship to God. And yet, you still shouldn't sacrifice your child. And anyone who's coming for my kids better expect that I'll have the shotgun out the back, boy. Just because it's secondary to God doesn't mean it's not still deeply important. The nation and the family are deeply important, even if they're not absolute.
But you're missing the main point, which is they've come at the sacrifice of the church. Donald Trump has been abysmal for the church. Look at the rates of evangelicalism. They've gone down since Trump's been in office because people don't want to be associated with someone like this. Back whenever Clinton was being elected, that evangelical Christians were the number one group to say morality counts. Morality counts in a political candidate's career. Now they are the least likely. In the space of a few years, they've completely flip-flopped to where it just doesn't matter. And of course, people are running away in droves. So yeah, get your family, get your nation, get these things back. But the church is suffering because of that. The church is absolutely suffering because it's being associated with everything that's terrible. As if Christians didn't have to deal with the accusation of hypocrisy already. Now we really have to deal with that. You yourself in the interview talked about knowing many people who've left the faith because of that. I know people as well. I know people who have. And how can we then say, oh, this is the great ally and savior of Christianity, while he drives people away from the church? So
That
yeah,
might be
take your
valid
families.
if
Take
that
your
might be valid if mainline progressive Christians were increasing or stabilizing, but they're not. They're decreasing as well. And so Christians that are overtly
Kind of.
against Trump aren't saving the faith. They're not increasing in droves. They're not even stable. They're losing people as well. And so it's not Trump who's driving people away from church. It's the state of the country. And so perhaps precisely because people across the board are leaving the faith, precisely now, Seth, is the time to return to faith, family, and God's country. Because everyone across the board is losing the faith, we need a strong man who's selling a Bible with his face on it to come and bring us back to the Lord.
No, so you're wrong about mainline. So yes, mainline denominations, their numbers are going down, but when you actually take polls that ask people about their actual beliefs, mainline beliefs are going up. And it's because these people are not going to the mainline denomination churches anymore. They're going to mainstream, they're going to these non-denominational churches. Denominationalism is dying, not mainline churches. Denominationalism is. People who have these more liberal Christian beliefs are actually going up right now. And part of the reason is even in these evangelical conservative churches, Trump is driving them towards that position, if not completely out of the church altogether. And so if you're going to be a conservative...
Do you know who else is dying? Unborn children, Seth.
Oh my gosh.
Unborn children are dying. You're talking about churches dying. We should be talking about the unborn children, Seth. There are over 1 billion children were killed since Roe v. Wade, and it's going to just keep getting more. The mass graves of the barren wombs of America are rising, and that flood of blood is going to stem the tide of our nation's soul until God strikes us down.
You're not even trying to defend. You're just being a satire of yourself.
Do you
have a real argument for abortion or pro-life?
Let's pivot, because this, I think, for a lot of Christians over and over again, this is what matters.
Okay,
it doesn't matter if he's wrong about immigration. It doesn't matter if he's bad for the faith. It's about the babies, Seth.
Okay, let me ask you this question: since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, how much have abortions gone down?
Significantly.
Yeah, not at all.
Abortions have gone down 75%.
That's not true.
In the top 45 states. No, it's 75% in 45 states. It's different in the remaining states, but 75% of abortions have gone down in 45 states.
It's gone up. It's gone up, John. Overall, it has gone up. So if you're curious, if you're trying to save lives of babies, it hasn't worked.
I think your numbers are wrong there. I think your numbers are off.
No, I've literally just looked this up and taught this. The reason it has gone down in these states is because people are going across state lines to have abortions because of restrictive abortion laws.
We need to create walls between the states.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, do you think Trump's going to do that? No. He is against any sort of national abortion ban. Even then, Dr. Reno talked about how he's betrayed the pro-life stance. He's betrayed it. He got that.
That's just a temporary thing.
More babies. Let me finish. More babies are dying now, and so yeah. The argument is just null and void. There is no argument anymore. More babies are dying because of Trump. Let me just put this as bluntly as possible.
Trump has temporarily adjusted his position to try to attract moderate voters. Of course he's doing that. He's trying to win an election, and he needs to draw some of those moderate voters. And so, yeah, but once he actually gets in the office, he's going to continue to do what he's did the last 4 years. He's going to promote conservative causes and the protection of the unborn. He's very clearly doing a strategic move, and I applaud him for it.
I don't think he will.
Of course, it's what he has to do.
I don't think he will. I think he pivots his stance on abortion based on the electorate. And right now, the pro-life position is the most unpopular it has ever been.
It should be unpopular.
Of what he did.
It's always unpopular to do what is right. And so even if all of America says that murdering infants,
not racist. No, you're wrong.
Even if all of America says that murdering children is okay, it's still wrong, because what the populace says is not the basis for what is right. You need to go and spend some time in Nazi Germany, Seth, and you'll learn that lesson.
This doesn't feel like a real argument from you.
I feel like I'm making serious points, even if I'm putting a fun spin on them.
Oh, come on. So, I mean, yes, morality is sometimes unpopular, but it's not unpopular now to not be racist. Let's be honest. We want the pro-life position to dominate, to become the majority, to win. Do we not? And my point is, Trump isn't doing that. He's doing the exact opposite. So yes, you have a temporary victory of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and that looked good on the surface. And yet, if the point was to protect babies' lives, that's the ultimate goal. That hasn't happened, and now it looks farther off than ever. There is, in my home state in Missouri, it's looking like there might be a law passed where abortion is just allowed pretty liberally. In Missouri, one of the most Republican states. So don't tell me Trump was good on the abortion issue. Wow, the abortions are getting higher, and red states like Kansas are passing very liberal abortion laws. Don't tell me that.
Okay, but here's the thing. Even if Trump is backtracking a bit, even if I were just to grant that, which I don't, even if I were to grant it, which I don't, Kamala Harris's whole thing is abortion. So electing her is obviously going to be worse than electing Trump on this issue, because this is her whole platform. She is going to massively expand access to abortion across the board on a federal level.
She can't.
No, yes, she can. And so this is her whole platform. So even if Trump isn't the best on abortion, you can argue that Kamala is far worse. And so even if Trump is backsliding, he still isn't going to backslide all the way into Kamala, who's waist deep in the blood of the unborn.
So, John, first off, very colorful imagery, obviously.
Okay, I think the color of the candidate is irrelevant, but whatever.
No,
you guys always like to claim that you're not racist, but I think the progressives are the most racist.
It's the fact that we wanted to help people out who've been historically marginalized. Yeah, how awful. Second off, when it comes to like, oh, she's going to do this. Really, John, what extra power do you think she's going to have that Biden doesn't have literally right now? Biden's not doing anything. He hasn't been able to do anything. So why switching out Biden for Kamala? Why do you think switching out Biden for Harris is going to change the formula at all?
Even if Biden hasn't been able to do anything, he is trying to do something. And it's not the Supreme Court that's going to determine this. It's Congress and how she works with Congress and how many people they have in the upcoming election. So the upcoming election needs to go red. It needs to go to the Republicans, or else they're going to get all this stuff passed.
You're arguing two things here. One, you're saying that we need to vote red for president. We need to vote for Donald Trump. Two, you need to vote for Congress, both Senate and House of Representatives, red. But the problem is those are two different things, John. You can vote for Kamala and then down ballot vote for red if that's what your concern is. And if my points are valid, that might be better overall for the church. A blue president and a red Congress. I have no business defending having a blue Congress as well. Right now, my point is to preserve the integrity of the church. And so I just don't hear a good argument for that.
When it comes to the unborn and the lives of the most helpless people in our civilization, which are the unborn, there needs to be not just one line of defense, there needs to be two lines of defense. It's not enough to just have a president it's not enough to just have a Congress that's okay if the president's constantly trying to pierce through Congress and might actually manage to succeed. If someone was trying to break into my home, I would put as many layers between them and my family as I could. I would lock the outside door. I would put up walls, and then I would lock us in the bathroom. I want multiple walls between the children of the nation's future, and I want both Congress and I want the presidency to be Republican, Seth, to protect the unborn.
John, and here's the problem. It's like tearing down one door in order to barricade another. And then the criminal just goes around the back door. That's like what Trump is. You threw up what you thought was a front door by tearing down Roe v. Wade, by getting rid of Roe v. Wade. And yet abortion has just increased. It opened up a gateway to where abortion has actually gotten worse. It's become more, people have been shouting it. They're proud of it. It used to be something that was sort of tragic but necessary. And now it's something that people are proud of because of this reaction. It's something that's gaining momentum, far more momentum than pro-life movement. But I kind of want to pivot as well. I don't want to spend all of this time. I want to ask you, do you think Donald Trump, you say you have friends who've left the faith. Do you think that he's actually helping the Christian cause, making Christianity more popular, making Jesus more famous worldwide?
You know, popular Christianity has never been true Christianity. Jesus doesn't want more fans. He wants true disciples. And even if there are less
But that's
fans
what he was
overall,
celebrating, cultural Christianity.
please don't interrupt. Even if
Ah.
even if even if there are less fans of Jesus, I want more followers of Jesus. And true followers do need to, support Trump because he's standing for what is right for our country. He is standing for the lives of the unborn. He is standing up for causes that Jesus and God believe in. And that might not be popular, even amongst Christians, and some Christians might leave. But you know what? Who also lost a lot of followers? Jesus. He often said unpopular things. And in the Gospels, in 2 Corinthians, it said that when Jesus said who he really was, a bunch of people left. And he said, "Are you still remaining?" to his disciples. And they said, "Where can we go? You have the words of life." So yeah, a lot of people will leave. Maybe Christians will leave the faith, but the true Christians, they're here in the long run, and they are behind Donald Trump.
It sounds like you're trying to say Donald Trump is defending all the right things while driving out the majority of people in a democracy. You can't have both of those. Either someone is helping make Jesus famous or he's poisoning the well. But you're trying to say he's doing both. And
He's
you
purifying the well, even if there's less water. Would you rather have a large well that's poison or a small well that's pure? Donald Trump is
I
purifying
want a
the
large
well.
well
And
that's well.
yeah,
I
that
want a
would be
large well
great.
that's
But that's
not
not what
poisoned.
Kamala's offering. That's not what Kamala's offering.
I don't think that's her role. I think our role as Christians is to think, how will this affect the church first and foremost? The greatest good in the world, the kingdom of God on earth. And the thing is Kamala is not going to hurt the church. I don't think so. We've had a lot of presidents, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. They come and go, and the evangelical church, if anything, seems to thrive under them. Yes, there are policies and these sort of things that we don't like. But then again, at the same time, look at what Trump has done. Has he done things to help the church? No. He has been more harmful for the church than anyone. He has been more harmful. There is an entire generation of kids growing up now that associate Trumpism with the church. And you cannot sit here and tell me that that hasn't caused irrevocable harm to what Christians are trying to do in this country.
Trump is maybe not the hero that we deserve, but he's the hero that we need right now, Seth. To quote Batman. And
really
he is the hero that we need, even if he's not the hero that we deserve, in the tradition of, say, Samson. Samson in the book of Judges was a vulgar, ridiculous, egotistical character, and yet God worked through Samson to bring about the good for the nation of Israel, and that is who Trump is. He is.
Why can't you make that same argument about?
Hold your nose and vote.
Why can't you make the same argument about Kamala? Samson did not have any of Israel's interests in mind, and yet God used him. Romans tells us, in Romans chapter 13, it tells us God uses all leaders. All leaders. That includes Joe Biden. God is using Joe Biden. So you can't just make this argument for Trump. You can make this for anyone, including Kamala Harris.
Sure, but I'm not the one who's attacking Kamala. You're the one who's attacking Trump. So it works in my defense.
I know, but my point is given us the fact that we have this, who has shown that they are less harmful towards the church? And to me, in this case, it's the one who isn't associating Christianity with toxic traits.
Okay, well, if you want to let in, I think you guys keep assuming that you have the moral high ground. You assume
it's
that,
pretty easy.
Progressives, and Donald Trump might not be flashy on the outside. He might not be well-spoken, but he's actually standing up for what matters. You guys want to let in lots of immigrants because you think that sounds Christian to love everyone, but you're not loving the people who are here because now they're getting paid less wages because they're having to compete with immigrants who are willing to work for far less. You're letting in criminals and all of these evil people who are just being let indiscriminately across the border. They're eating the dogs in Ohio. That continues to be true.
That's a myth. That's a myth.
No, yes. I saw it on TV. No, it was there, and multiple
This is
sources
what I mean. You're not really
have shown
trying.
it.
You're not really trying.
No, but here's the thing. Donald Trump has repeated this even now. He repeated it recently. So I'm making his case. I'm making his case for him, Seth.
Not his best case for him.
Here's the thing. You know what? It sounds good to just let everybody into the country, but if you let everybody into the country will collapse. It's just like with the Titanic. It would be great to let everyone into the lifeboat. If we let everyone into the lifeboat, no one's in the lifeboat because it capsizes and everyone dies. So what is the right thing to do? It's the hard decision, the type of decision that only a masculine, strong leader like Donald Trump can make. And that's to say, there's enough people in the boat. We need to take off now. And that's the case when it comes to immigrants. That's the case when it comes to these types of issues. We need a man who's willing to look evil in the face and not turn away. Is that Kamala? Seth, is that Kamala?
Yeah. So the anti-immigrant rhetoric goes back hundreds of years. You can find anti-European rhetoric from 100 years ago. And yet now these same descendants of these Europeans are making anti-Latin American rhetoric. There's always been this in America. There's always been this fear of the immigrant coming in. And yet the very point of like erecting things like the Statue of Liberty is to remind us that this is the backbone of our nation. Is immigration. Give us, you're tired, you're poor. These people who are hungry for a better life, and they will make it better. You know, that's the funny thing is these illegal immigrants who come in and they're like, oh, they're stealing our jobs. They're doing the jobs that white people don't want to do anymore. The hard, dirty work. They are doing those jobs that white people don't want anymore. And yeah, they're taking it and they're doing it at a lower wage. But that also means those same people, you're like, oh, they're taking their jobs because they're doing it at lower wages. Yeah, that also means our products are cheaper. That they can afford things that they couldn't otherwise because they don't think about economics. They don't think about the economics of the situation. So if you get rid of all of them, yeah, you might have your job back, but all of a sudden now you can't afford anything anyway because everything's more expensive.
Well, that's why we need to put tariffs on foreign countries and make America first again. We need to start.
That will make things more expensive.
No,
tariffs make things more expensive.
You got your numbers wrong. No, tariffs will force other nations to pay us what they deserve to pay us, and it'll make America's economy great again. That's how we're going to pay for the wall. That's how we're going to support our economy. I am strong on the economy. Well, Mexico is going to pay for it. They already have paid for it. If you look at some of the latest figures that are coming out, Mexico has paid for it. They're going to continue to pay for it, but we're also going to support it with tariffs.
Are you just making things up?
No, you need to get your facts straight. There is multiple stuff on this. You need to look it up.
What, like what?
There was that article in Fox, that they promoted last week. There's a lot of things, and I think you're making a lot of claims, and the American people are hearing you, and it's not responsible. It's disgraceful.
If we do get Trump in office and he deports one immigrant, I hope he begins with you. Thanks again for listening to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe below, or to check us out on Spotify. And if you want to hear more from this week's episode or guest, our Patreon account has exclusive unaired content, often featuring up to an hour of additional footage and interviews for each episode. We save some of the most controversial and pulse-pounding topics just for our Patreon members. Members get access to that, plus the chance to meet monthly with Jonathan and I, suggest episode topics, join us live for an episode to ask the special guests questions, or even get a personalized episode custom-made just for you. Check out our Patreon link in the description below. And don't forget to check out our official website at spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com to see what else you're missing out on. Sound effects from Zapsplat.com. Special thanks to Jordan Birch, whose song Starry Night provides the intro and outro for this podcast. You can hear more of his music on YouTube or Spotify.